Money screams, but true wealth whispers. When Ciara and his family approached the first-class boarding lane at JFK's Terminal 4, they expected a seamless start to their London vacation. Instead, they met Brenda, a veteran gate agent who had already decided that a casually dressed black family didn't belong in her exclusive cabin. For 20 agonizing minutes, she weaponized her uniform, turning a routine boarding process into a public spectacle of humiliation. She thought she was protecting the airline's elite image from imposters. She had absolutely no idea that the quiet, gray-haired man watching her every move from the shadows was the very man who signed her paycheck. John F. Kennedy International Airport was a cathedral of chaos, but Terminal 4 at 7 p.m. was a specific breed of high-stakes frenzy. Outside, the New York evening was dissolving into a cold, biting drizzle, but inside the terminal, the climate was strictly controlled, smelling faintly of stale coffee, industrial floor wax, and the expensive duty-free perfumes wafting from the nearby boutiques. At Gate B-22, the massive silver fuselage of a Boeing 777-300ER sat heavy on the tarmac, preparing for its transatlantic leap to London Heathrow. This was Crown Atlantic Airlines' flagship route, the golden goose of their international schedule, catering to Wall Street bankers, tech magnates, and British old money. Presiding over the boarding podium was Brenda Carmichael. Brenda was 52, had worked for the airline for 18 years, and wore her navy blue uniform blazer like a general's decorated tunic. Her blonde hair was sprayed into a rigid helmet that defied the airport's dry air, and her lips were painted a sharp, unforgiving crimson. To Brenda, the first-class cabin wasn't just a section of the airplane, it was a sanctuary, and she was its ultimate gatekeeper. Over the years, she had developed what she proudly called her sixth sense for who belonged in the front of the plane and who belonged in the cramped, airless rows of the back. She looked for the telltale signs, the casual flash of a Rolex Daytona, the effortless handling of a scarred Rimowa aluminum suitcase, the specific, bored posture of the truly wealthy. Tonight, the flight was fully booked. The priority boarding lane, marked by a plush, royal blue carpet that separated the elite from the masses, was unclipped, signaling that pre-boarding for first class and diamond tier members was about to commence. That was when the Hayes family approached. Sierra Hayes was 38, a man whose quiet demeanor masked a fiercely brilliant mind. 10 years ago, he had coded a cybersecurity protocol in his cramped Brooklyn apartment that was later acquired by a Silicon Valley titan for a sum that made him generationally wealthy. But Ciara abhorred the traditional trappings of extreme wealth. Tonight, preparing for a 7-hour overnight flight, he wore a simple gray cashmere hoodie, dark Lululemon joggers, and a pair of pristine white Nike Air Force 1S. His wife, Sarah, was equally comfortable in a tailored beige tracksuit, gently holding the hand of their 8-year-old daughter, Chloe, who was clutching a stuffed golden retriever and yawning widely. They looked like a normal, happy, tired family. They did not look like Brenda's idea of Crown Atlantic first class. As Ciara stepped onto the edge of the royal blue carpet, pulling a simple black Tumi carry-on, Brenda's eyes narrowed. Her internal alarm bells, calibrated by years of unchecked unconscious bias, began to ring. She stepped out from behind the safety of her podium, physically blocking the entrance to the priority lane. "Excuse me, sir," Brenda said. Her voice was loudly projected, carrying over the ambient noise of the gate area. It was the tone of a school principal addressing a truant child. "This line is for first class and Diamond Elite members only. The main cabin boarding will not begin for another 40 minutes. You need to step back and wait in Zone 5. Ciara blinked, mildly surprised by the sudden barricade. He offered a polite, patient smile. He was used to the occasional misunderstanding. "Good evening. Yes, we know. We're in first." Brenda's crimson lips pressed into a tight, skeptical line. She didn't budge. Her eyes swept over Ciara's hoodie, Sarah's lack of visible diamonds, and the little girl's stuffed dog. "Sir, I don't think you heard me. This is the first-class lane. Crown first, not premium economy. I need to keep this pathway clear for our priority passengers." Sarah's spine stiffened. She stepped forward, her voice calm but layered with a sudden, icy edge. "We heard you perfectly the first time. My husband said we are flying first class." Brenda let out a short, breathy chuckle that conveyed absolutely no amusement. "Right. Let me see your boarding passes, then. All of them." It wasn't a request. It was a demand, issued with the clear expectation that Ciara was about to pull out paper tickets stamped with row 45. Ciara, maintaining his composure for the sake of his daughter, reached into his jacket pocket and retrieved 3 heavy stock boarding passes, handing them to Brenda. Brenda snatched them from his hand. She looked down at the crisp white cards. Hayes, Ciara, Seat 1A. Hayes, Sarah. Seat 1B. Hayes, Chloe. Seat 2A. For a fraction of a second, Brenda's expression faltered. But pride is a dangerous poison, and Brenda had ingested too much of it over the years. Instead of apologizing and stepping aside, her mind immediately scrambled for a reason why these tickets must be invalid, stolen, or the result of a system glitch. The idea that this black family in sweatpants legitimately owned $10,000 tickets simply did not compute in her rigid worldview. "These were printed at the self-service kiosk," Brenda noted, her voice dripping with suspicion. "Yes, they were," Ciara replied, the warmth entirely gone from his smile now. "Is there a problem with the kiosks?" "Step aside," Brenda commanded, gesturing sharply to a small, empty area next to the podium, completely off the blue carpet. "I need to verify these in the system. The computer has been issuing phantom upgrades all week." The gate area was beginning to fill up. Businessmen in tailored Brioni suits and women draped in Burberry scarves were congregating around the boarding area, their eyes naturally drawn to the conflict. Brenda's loud, authoritative tone had successfully turned the Hayes family into a public spectacle. Ciara felt a flush of heat rise in his chest. He looked at Sarah, who was holding Chloe closer to her side. Chloe was looking up at her father, her large brown eyes reflecting confusion. "Daddy, did we do something wrong?" she whispered. "No, sweetie," Ciara said softly, squeezing his daughter's shoulder. "The lady is just confused. We'll be on the plane in a minute." Ciara moved his family to the designated spot, refusing to cause a scene that would frighten his daughter. But his patience was wearing dangerously thin. Brenda marched behind the podium and began aggressively typing on her keyboard. The old Sabre reservation system clacked loudly under her manicured fingernails. She stared at the screen, her eyes darting across the green text on the black background. The screen displayed the truth plainly. The tickets were fully paid, full fare, first class. No miles used, no employee non-rev passes, no phantom upgrades. They had paid nearly $30,000 in cold, hard cash for the 3 seats. But Brenda's ego refused to accept defeat. If they had paid for it, she reasoned, it must be fraud. Credit card theft was rampant, after all. It was her duty to protect the airline. While Brenda pretended to scrutinize the screen, a tall, older white gentleman in a pristine navy suit approached the priority lane. He carried a battered leather briefcase. Brenda instantly looked up, her face transforming into a mask of obsequious delight. "Mr. Pendleton, welcome back. Heading to London for the merger meetings?" Arthur Pendleton smiled warmly. "Hello, Brenda. Yes, indeed. Just a quick turnaround this time." "Wonderful. Your seat is 1F, right this way. Have a beautiful flight," Brenda cooed, stepping aside and gesturing grandly toward the jet bridge. She didn't ask to see his boarding pass. She didn't ask him to step aside to verify his status. She simply let him walk through. Sarah watched this exchange, her jaw tightening. "Excuse me," she said, her voice cutting through the ambient noise of the gate. "You didn't verify his boarding pass. Why are we standing here?" Brenda looked at Sarah as if she were a mild annoyance, like a fly buzzing near her ear. "Mr. Pendleton is a frequent flyer, ma'am. I know him personally. I do not know you." "You don't need to know us to do your job," Ciara interjected, stepping up to the podium. The quiet tech billionaire was gone. In his place was a man fiercely protective of his family's dignity. "Our tickets are valid. You've scanned them. You've looked at the screen. Give me my boarding passes and let my family board the aircraft." Brenda bristled. She hated being challenged, especially in front of her audience of waiting passengers. "Sir, I will ask you to lower your voice. Airline security is a serious matter. Your reservation flagged an irregularity in the system. I cannot let you board until I clear it." It was a blatant lie, and Ciara knew it. "An irregularity," Ciara repeated slowly. "What kind of irregularity?" "A payment verification hold," Brenda improvised, typing a few meaningless keystrokes to look busy. "I need to see the credit card that was used to purchase these tickets. Now." A murmur rippled through the passengers standing nearby. Asking for the physical credit card at the gate was an incredibly rare procedure, usually reserved for extreme cases of suspected fraud booked hours before the flight, not for tickets booked months in advance. Ciara didn't shout. He didn't swear, but his eyes grew cold, hardening into dark obsidian. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his wallet. He slipped out a heavy, black titanium American Express Centurion card, the legendary black card, issued strictly by invitation to the ultra-wealthy. He placed it on the counter with a heavy, metallic clack. "There," Ciara said, his voice dangerously quiet. "Verify it." Brenda looked at the heavy metal card. She had seen a few in her career, usually in the hands of A-list celebrities or hedge fund managers. Seeing it in the hands of this man in a hoodie shattered her preconceived narrative. Panic flickered in her eyes, but it was quickly swallowed by a doubling down of stubborn pride. She picked up the card, examining the name engraved on the metal. Ciara Hayes. "Anyone can have a name printed on a piece of metal," Brenda muttered under her breath, loud enough for the Hayes family to hear. "I'm going to have to call a supervisor to authorize this override." "You do that," Sarah said, stepping up right beside her husband. "And while you're at it, call the station manager. Because we are not moving from this spot until you explain exactly why my family is being treated like criminals." The standoff at Gate B-22 had now frozen the entire boarding process. The priority lane was backed up, and the main cabin passengers were growing restless in their zones. Yet, nobody dared interrupt the tense tableau unfolding at the podium. Unnoticed by Brenda, a man had quietly separated himself from the crowd of waiting first-class passengers. He was in his late 60s, wearing a perfectly tailored charcoal gray suit without a tie. His silver hair was neatly trimmed, and his blue eyes were sharp and observant. He held no carry-on bag, only a sleek leather portfolio. He did not approach the desk. Instead, he stood near a structural pillar about 10 feet away, leaning casually against it, watching Brenda with an expression of profound, quiet disappointment. This man was Richard Sterling. 3 weeks ago, Richard Sterling's private equity firm, Sterling Global Holdings, had executed a hostile takeover of Crown Atlantic Airlines. The airline had been hemorrhaging money due to terrible customer retention and a reputation for abysmal service. Richard, known in the industry as a ruthless perfectionist, had decided to spend his first month as the new majority owner flying the network incognito, observing the frontline operations exactly as a normal passenger would experience them. He had seen some minor infractions earlier that day, a dirty lounge bathroom, a delayed baggage belt, but what he was witnessing now made his blood run cold. He was watching a senior employee actively, maliciously profile and humiliate a high-net-worth client. At the podium, Brenda picked up the heavy black desk phone. She didn't actually dial the station manager. She knew the station manager would take one look at the Sabre screen and reprimand her for delaying a prime departure. Instead, she dialed the internal gate desk line, letting it ring out, putting on a show of bureaucratic diligence. "They're not answering," Brenda lied smoothly, hanging up the phone with a heavy sigh. She looked at Ciara, crossing her arms over her chest. "Look, it's simple. The system won't clear the fraud alert. I have 2 options. I can either deny you boarding entirely, which means you forfeit the tickets, or I can downgrade you to economy, where the security threshold is lower, and we can investigate the payment issue while you're in the air. We have 3 seats in row 52. Sarah let out a sharp gasp. "Row 52? You are out of your mind." "Ma'am, I am trying to help you get to London," Brenda snapped, her patience entirely manufactured. "If you refuse, I will call Port Authority police and have you escorted out of the terminal for causing a disturbance. You are holding up my flight." Ciara felt a cold fury settle into his bones. He looked down at Chloe. She was trembling slightly, holding her stuffed dog so tightly her knuckles were pale. The sight of his daughter terrified by an airline employee broke whatever restraint Ciara had left. "You listen to me very carefully," Ciara said. His voice wasn't loud, but the sheer gravity of his tone caused the murmuring crowd to fall silent. "There is no fraud alert on that screen. I know this because I built the architecture for the payment gateway your airline uses to process those tickets. My name is Ciara Hayes. I paid for those seats. My family will sit in those seats. You are not going to downgrade us, and you are not going to deny us boarding. You are going to hand me my boarding passes right now." Brenda's face flushed a deep, mottled red. She felt her authority slipping away, challenged in front of 50 passengers. "I am the senior gate agent on duty," she practically shrieked, slamming her hand flat on the podium. "I have the final say on who boards my aircraft. I am declaring you a security risk. You are not flying Crown Atlantic tonight." She reached over to her keyboard and viciously hit the sequence to cancel the Hayes family's check-in status. Delete. Enter. Confirm. "There," Brenda said, a victorious, nasty smirk spreading across her face. "Your tickets are canceled. Now step away from my podium before I call security." From his spot by the pillar, Richard Sterling stopped leaning. He slowly closed his leather portfolio. The quiet observation phase of his evening was officially over. He took a slow, deliberate breath, adjusted the cuffs of his suit jacket, and began to walk toward the podium. The sound of his leather-soled shoes clicking against the hard linoleum floor seemed to echo in the sudden, shocked silence of Gate B-22. The crowd parted instinctively, sensing a shift in the atmosphere. Richard bypassed Ciara and Sarah, stepping directly up to the side of the podium. He didn't look at the computer screen. He looked directly into Brenda's eyes. "Cancel the cancellation," Richard said. His voice was entirely devoid of emotion, soft but carrying the undeniable weight of absolute authority. Brenda whipped her head around, glaring at the older man. "Excuse me? Who do you think you are? Step back into the boarding area, sir. This is an active security situation." Richard didn't blink. He reached into his jacket pocket, pulled out a solid silver business card holder, and extracted a single, crisp white card. He placed it directly on top of Ciara's black titanium credit card. Brenda looked down, ready to scream at the interfering passenger, but the words died in her throat. The card didn't have a logo. It just had a name, printed in a simple, elegant black font. Richard Sterling, Chairman and Chief Executive Officer, Sterling Global Holdings. Brenda felt the air evacuate her lungs. The blood drained from her face so rapidly she felt dizzy. Sterling Global, the new owners. The ruthless private equity firm that had fired the entire executive board last Tuesday. "I won't ask you again," Richard said, his voice dropping an octave, cold as a winter storm. "Reinstate Mr. Hayes's tickets. Now." Brenda's hands began to shake. The heavy plastic of the Sabre keyboard, which had been her instrument of absolute power just seconds ago, suddenly looked like a trap waiting to snap shut. She stared at the business card resting on the podium, Richard Sterling. The name echoed in her mind, a death knell to her 18-year career. Mr. Sterling," Brenda stammered, the authoritative bass completely evaporating from her voice, replaced by a high, thin wheeze. I wasn't aware you were flying with us this evening. If the station manager had informed you, you would have put on a polite smile and hidden your utter contempt for our paying customers," Richard interrupted, his voice a low, lethal hum. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. The silence at Gate B-22 was absolute. Dozens of passengers were watching with bated breath, their smartphones subtly angled toward the podium, recording the spectacular implosion of the gatekeeper. "Sir, I was following protocol," Brenda lied, desperation clawing at her throat. She tried to physically block the monitor with her body. The system flagged a high-risk transaction. "I am required by federal regulations to..." "Step away from the podium, Brenda," Richard commanded. He didn't look at her. His eyes were fixed on the green and black screen behind her. "You can't just access the terminal," Brenda protested weakly, though she was already taking a step back, her knees trembling. "It's a security violation for a passenger to—" "I own the terminal," Richard stated simply. He stepped behind the desk. Unlike most private equity executives who only looked at spreadsheets, Richard had spent the last 3 weeks immersing himself in the operational mechanics of Crown Atlantic. He had specifically requested training on the legacy Sabre system to understand the archaic technology his new company relied on. He knew the command codes. His fingers moved over the keys with surprising speed. Control+I, Alt+H. He pulled up the transaction history for Sierra Hayes' passenger name record. The screen populated with a chronological log of every keystroke Brenda had executed over the last 10 minutes. There were no system flags. There were no fraud alerts from American Express. There was only a manual override code: agent-initiated cancellation, reason, security, disruptive passenger. Richard let out a slow, sharp breath through his nose. He turned to face the crowd, and then looked directly at Ciara and Sarah. The anger in his eyes wasn't directed at them. It was on their behalf. "Mr. Hayes," Richard said, his voice carrying clearly across the boarding area, "I want to personally apologize to you, your wife, and your daughter. There was absolutely no fraud alert on your reservation. Your tickets were fully paid and confirmed. This agent fabricated a security threat to justify denying you boarding." A collective gasp rippled through the gathered passengers. Arthur Pendleton, the businessman Brenda had waved through earlier, had stopped on the jet bridge and walked back up, standing in the doorway with a look of profound disgust. Ciara didn't gloat. He didn't smile. He just held his daughter's hand a little tighter. "I know," Ciara said quietly. "I designed the back-end encryption for the payment processor. The transaction was flawless." Brenda's face was now the color of wet ash. "Mr. Sterling, you have to understand. We see so much fraud." "What I understand," Richard cut her off, turning his icy gaze back to her, "is that you saw a black family in comfortable clothing and decided they didn't belong in your first-class cabin. You weaponized airline security protocols designed to keep people safe from terrorism, to satisfy your own prejudice. You lied to a customer, you lied to a crowd of witnesses, and you lied to me." Richard picked up the heavy black desk phone. He didn't pretend to dial. He hit the speed dial for the Terminal 4 Operations Director, Thomas Wright. "Thomas, it's Richard Sterling. I'm at Gate B22. I need you up here immediately. Bring airport police and a replacement gate agent. We have a situation." He hung up the phone. Brenda was openly crying now, her rigid posture entirely collapsed. The meticulously sprayed helmet of blonde hair seemed to wilt. "Please, Mr. Sterling. I have a pension. I've been here 18 years. I have a daughter in college." "And Mr. Hayes has a daughter right here, whom you just terrified," Richard said, his voice entirely devoid of sympathy. "You should have thought about your pension before you decided to humiliate a family in front of 100 people." Richard turned back to the keyboard, his fingers flying across the keys as he manually reversed the cancellation. He printed 3 fresh, crisp boarding passes. He walked around the podium, bypassing Brenda completely, and handed them personally to Ciara. "Mr. Hayes, Mrs. Hayes, Chloe," Richard said, softening his tone considerably as he looked at the young girl. "Your seats are waiting for you. The purser has been notified of your arrival. Please, board the aircraft. I will handle the rest of this." Ciara took the boarding passes. He looked at Richard, a silent understanding passing between the two men. "Thank you, Mr. Sterling. We appreciate it." As the Hayes family finally walked down the jet bridge, the remaining passengers in the terminal erupted into spontaneous, ringing applause. Brenda flinched, covering her face with her hands, as the sound of her public disgrace echoed off the high glass ceilings of Terminal 4. The transition from the chaotic, hostile gate area to the interior of the Boeing 777-300ER was jarring in its tranquility. Stepping onto the aircraft, The Hayes family was immediately enveloped in the soft, warm, ambient lighting of the Crown first-class cabin. The air here smelled of fresh orchids and the faint, clean scent of ozone. Claire Bennett, the chief purser, was waiting for them at the door. She was a woman in her late 40s with a kind, open face and a meticulously pressed uniform. She had already received a frantic, encrypted message on her iPad from operations regarding the incident at the gate. "Mr. Hayes, Mrs. Hayes, welcome aboard," Claire said, her voice a soothing balm after the abrasive encounter outside. "We are so incredibly honored to have you flying with us tonight. Let me show you to your suites." The first-class cabin consisted of only 8 private suites, enclosed by sliding doors crafted from dark walnut and frosted glass. Seats 1A, 1B, and 2A were located in the very front, offering maximum privacy. The seats themselves were massive armchairs upholstered in deep burgundy leather, preset with plush duvet bedding, noise-canceling headphones, and amenity kits housed in genuine leather cases. Sarah let out a long, shuddering breath as she sank into seat 1B. The adrenaline was finally leaving her system, replaced by a deep, bone-weary exhaustion. She looked across the aisle at Ciara, who was helping Chloe settle into 2A. "Are you okay, Bug?" Ciara asked, crouching down beside his daughter's seat. Chloe nodded slowly, placing her stuffed golden retriever on the polished mahogany tray table. "That lady was really mean, Daddy. Why didn't she want us on the plane?" Ciara sighed, a heavy, sorrowful sound. He hated that his daughter had to learn this particular lesson so early in life. "Sometimes, sweetie, people make up stories in their heads about who other people are just by looking at them. And when reality doesn't match their story, they get angry. But she was wrong, and the man who owns the company made sure she knew it." "Will she go to jail?" Chloe asked innocently. "No," Ciara said softly, "but she won't be working here anymore, and she'll have a lot of time to think about why." Claire reappeared, holding a silver tray with 3 crystal flutes. 2 contained Laurent Perrier Grand Siècle champagne, and the third held sparkling apple cider garnished with a fresh strawberry. "To help you settle in," she smiled, handing the cider to Chloe, whose eyes lit up at the fancy presentation. 10 minutes later, as the main cabin boarding resumed under the frantic supervision of a new gate agent, Richard Sterling walked onto the plane. He didn't have an entourage. He carried his leather portfolio and nodded politely to the flight attendants. His seat was 2K, on the opposite side of the cabin from the Hayes family. Before settling in, Richard walked over to Ciara's suite. He stood in the aisle, his posture rigid but respectful. "Mr. Hayes, I didn't want to intrude, but I wanted to assure you personally that the incident outside is not the end of the matter. Thomas Wright, our operations director, has escorted Brenda off the premises. Her credentials have been revoked, pending a formal termination hearing tomorrow morning." Ciara took a sip of his champagne, studying the older man. "You handled it decisively, Mr. Sterling. But prejudice isn't a glitch in an employee. Usually, it's a feature of a corporate culture that allows it to fester. If she felt comfortable doing that so publicly, it's because she thought she could get away with it." Richard's expression darkened, not with anger at Ciara, but with grim agreement. "You are exactly right, and that is exactly what we are currently tearing apart." Back inside Terminal 4, deep within the subterranean labyrinth of the airline's operational offices, Thomas Wright was doing just that. He sat at a metal desk, staring at a frozen computer monitor. Brenda Carmichael sat in a chair opposite him, her face puffy from crying, her union representative sitting silently by her side. When Richard had ordered Thomas to pull Brenda's logs, he didn't just mean for that evening. He meant her entire historical record. And what Thomas found was a staggering, systemic abuse of power. "Brenda," Thomas said, his voice heavy with disbelief as he scrolled through pages of data, "I'm looking at your gate control records for the past 3 years. I'm filtering for agent-initiated cancellations and involuntary downgrades in the first and business class cabins." Brenda stared at her lap, twisting a shredded tissue in her hands. She said nothing. "There's a pattern here," Thomas continued, turning the monitor so the union rep could see it. "Every time the premium cabins are overbooked, or when you have a friend flying on an employee standby pass, you initiate a downgrade to free up a seat. But you don't downgrade the lowest fare class, like you're supposed to. You selectively target passengers. The union rep, a hardened veteran of labor disputes, leaned in and adjusted his glasses. He looked at the names on the list: Washington, Patel, Rodriguez, Chen, Jackson. The silence in the room was deafening. The data was irrefutable. Brenda hadn't just been having a bad day with the Hayes family. She had spent years running her own private, discriminatory fiefdom at Gate B22. Whenever she needed a first-class seat to give to a white business traveler she favored, or an airline employee she was friendly with, she would scan the manifest for a minority passenger. She would fabricate a security hold, a system glitch, or a payment verification error, downgrade them to economy, and give their premium seat away. Because most passengers are terrified of arguing with gate agents and risking their travel plans, she had gotten away with it. They took the downgrade, accepted the partial refund later, and never filed a formal complaint. Until she picked a fight with a tech billionaire who knew exactly how the system worked, right in front of the CEO who had just bought the airline. "Brenda," Thomas said, closing the file folder on his desk with a definitive thud, "this isn't just a fireable offense. This is a massive civil rights liability. The legal department is going to have a field day with this." Brenda finally looked up, her eyes wide with a terror that went far beyond losing her job. I didn't mean it like that. I was just trying to manage the cabin. You know how demanding the Diamond Elite members can be. You sacrificed paying customers to play favorites based on their skin color," Thomas said coldly. "Hand over your ID badge and your security clearance card. Now, back on the aircraft, the heavy boarding doors were finally sealed shut. The massive engines of the Boeing 777 spooled up, a deep, resonant hum that vibrated through the floorboards. As the plane pushed back from the gate, Sierra looked out the window at the rain-slicked tarmac of JFK. The lights of the terminal were fading into the distance. He felt Sarah's hand slip into his, her thumb gently stroking his knuckles. They were going to London. They were safe, and they were together. But the ripple effects of what had happened at Gate B22 were just beginning. A shockwave that was about to tear through the entire corporate structure of Crown Atlantic Airlines. At 35,000 feet over the ink-black expanse of the Atlantic Ocean, the Boeing 777-300ER was a marvel of pressurized engineering and insulated silence. In the first-class cabin, the lights had been dimmed to a soft, starlit blue. Most passengers had reclined their suites into fully flat beds, surrendering to the quiet hum of the massive Rolls-Royce engines. But in seat 2K, Richard Sterling was wide awake. The soft glow of his laptop illuminated his sharp, angular features. He was connected to the aircraft's high-speed satellite Wi-Fi, and the emails he was sending were acting as digital smart bombs, detonating across the executive levels of Crown Atlantic's corporate headquarters in Chicago. Richard was a man who believed in surgical corporate warfare. He didn't just want Brenda Carmichael fired. He wanted the systemic rot that allowed her to thrive completely excised. He had established a secure video link with Harrison Caldwell, the ruthless managing partner of Sterling Global's external legal counsel, and Evelyn Carter, the newly appointed Senior Vice President of Human Resources. "I want the entire JFK terminal management team audited," Richard typed rapidly, his fingers striking the keys with lethal precision. Brenda Carmichael did not operate in a vacuum. You do not falsify federal security overrides in the Sabre system for 3 years without a station manager looking the other way. A message popped up from Harrison Caldwell. "Richard, if she was misusing TSA security flags to involuntarily downgrade paying passengers, we aren't just looking at a civil rights lawsuit. Falsifying passenger threat levels to manipulate the manifest is a direct violation of FAA regulations and Title 49. It's federal wire fraud. We need to notify the Department of Transportation immediately to get ahead of the liability." Richard's eyes narrowed. The twist was far more sinister than simple, ugly bigotry. It was an organized racket. Thomas Wright the operations director, back on the ground in New York, had just uploaded the preliminary findings of Brenda's historical data. Richard opened the encrypted file. The truth was laid bare in cold, hard spreadsheet cells. Brenda wasn't just downgrading minority passengers out of spite. She was monetizing her prejudice. She was running an underground buddy pass ring. Whenever she had friends, extended family, or colleagues flying on free employee standby tickets, she would deliberately overbook the first-class cabin. Then, she would scan the manifest for passengers, with names that sounded non-white, or those she deemed unlikely to fight back. She would trigger a fake security hold, downgrade them to economy, and seamlessly slide her standby friends into the $30,000 suites. The targeted passengers, bewildered and exhausted, usually accepted the downgrade and a partial refund just to get home, completely unaware they had been robbed of their seats to subsidize a gate agent's social life. And the man signing off on these manual overrides? Gregory Aris, the JFK station manager. Richard felt a cold, acidic fury burn in his chest. He typed a single command to Evelyn Carter. Terminate Gregory Aris immediately. Do not wait for him to arrive for his morning shift. Send a courier to his home in Long Island with his papers. Lock his system access now. Across the aisle, Sierra Hayes emerged from his suite. He had changed into a pair of dark, comfortable sleepwear provided by the airline, but sleep was entirely elusive. The adrenaline of the confrontation, mixed with the sickening realization of what his daughter had witnessed, kept his mind racing. He walked back toward the galley to ask for a glass of water. As he passed seat 2K, Richard looked up from his screen. "Mr. Hayes," Richard said softly, closing his laptop halfway so the screen glow didn't blind the younger man. "Care to join me for a drink? The lounge area behind row 4 is empty." Sierra paused, studying the older CEO. He nodded slowly. "Sure." The onboard lounge was a small, elegantly curved bar, bathed in warm amber light, stocked with premium spirits. Claire, the purser, discreetly poured Sierra a sparkling water and Richard a neat Macallan 18, then retreated behind the curtain to give the men privacy. "I owe you another apology, Sierra," Richard began, dropping the formal titles. "What you experienced at Gate B22 wasn't just a lapse in customer service. My team on the ground just completed a preliminary audit of her terminal logs." Sierra took a sip of his water, leaning against the leather-padded bulkhead. "It wasn't an isolated incident, was it?" "No," Richard admitted, his voice heavy with disgust. "She has a documented history of weaponizing security protocols to involuntarily downgrade minority passengers, and she was doing it to give those first-class seats to her friends flying on employee passes. It's a systemic fraud ring, aided and abetted by the station manager." Sierra closed his eyes for a moment, a muscle feathering in his jaw. My God, to think she used the excuse of terrorism and security threats to justify stealing seats from people based on the color of their skin. And no one caught this? The previous administration was focused entirely on stock buybacks, Richard said grimly. They ignored passenger complaints, automated the grievance process, and let middle management run wild. That ends tonight. I've already forwarded the logs to the Department of Transportation and the FAA. We are self-reporting the federal violations. Sierra looked at Richard with a newfound respect. Most CEOs would have tried to bury the incident, offering the Hayes family hush money and a lifetime of free flights in exchange for a non-disclosure agreement. Sterling was choosing to burn his own house down to cleanse the rot. "You know," Sierra said quietly, looking down at his glass. "I built my cybersecurity firm on the premise of zero-trust architecture. The idea that a system is only as secure as its most vulnerable access point. You can have firewalls made of titanium, but if the guard at the front gate is corrupt, the entire fortress falls." "Brenda was our corrupted guard," Richard agreed. "I'm flying to London," Sierra continued, his voice steady, "to meet with the executive board of the Sovereign Wealth Fund. They are the primary investors in my new venture. I know for a fact they are also the lead financiers, considering a $2 billion capital injection into Sterling Global to fund your fleet renewal." Richard's hand froze halfway to his mouth, the crystal tumbler of scotch hovering in the air. The breath caught in his throat. If Ciara Hayes had been denied boarding, if he had been humiliated and left standing in Terminal 4 by Crown Atlantic, that $2 billion deal would have evaporated before the sun rose in London. Brenda Carmichael hadn't just insulted a wealthy passenger. She had nearly bankrupted the airline's future. Ciara. Richard started, truly shaken for the first time that evening. "Don't worry, Richard," Ciara said, offering a small, reassuring smile. "I judge a company not by the mistakes of its lowest denominator, but by the immediate actions of its leadership. You handled it. The deal is safe, but I expect to see sweeping changes when I fly back." "You have my word," Richard said, raising his glass in a solemn toast. "The company you fly back with will not be the same one you boarded today." Karma, when it arrives, rarely knocks politely. For Brenda Carmichael, it kicked her front door off its hinges precisely 48 hours after the flight to London departed. Despite Richard Sterling's swift internal decapitation of the JFK management team, the modern digital world does not wait for corporate press releases. During the agonizing 20-minute standoff at the priority boarding podium, a dozen passengers had discreetly recorded the entire altercation on their smartphones. By Tuesday morning, a perfectly edited, high-definition video of the incident hit Twitter, TikTok, and Reddit. The footage captured everything with brutal clarity. Brenda's sneering condescension, her blatant profiling of Ciara in his casual clothing, her absurd demand for the physical titanium credit card, and the chilling moment she fabricated a security threat to cancel their tickets. It also captured Richard Sterling's icy, devastating intervention. The internet dubbed her gatekeeper, Brenda. Within 12 hours, the video amassed over 40 million views. The backlash was absolute, a digital firestorm that consumed Brenda's life. News vans parked outside her modest brick home in New Jersey, their satellite dishes raised like mechanical vultures. Her face was splashed across the morning broadcasts of every major news network. She was no longer just an arrogant employee having a bad day. She had become the national poster child for corporate racism and the abuse of petty authority. Her phone rang incessantly, forcing her to disconnect the line entirely. But the social humiliation was merely the appetizer for the legal and financial ruin that followed. On Wednesday morning, Brenda sat in the sterile, fluorescent-lit office of a local employment attorney, weeping uncontrollably into a shredded tissue. She clutched a thick stack of termination documents delivered by a federal courier just hours prior. "They can't just take my pension," Brenda sobbed, her voice a hollow, desperate rasp. "I gave Crown Atlantic Airlines 18 years of my life. I have a matching 401k. My daughter is starting college in the fall, and I have out-of-state tuition to pay. They can't just leave me with nothing." The lawyer, a tired man named Robert Harding with a drooping mustache, looked over the paperwork and sighed heavily. He slid a red-lined document across the mahogany desk. He had seen bad terminations before, but this was a catastrophic self-destruction. "Brenda, I need you to look at Section 4, Paragraph B of your union collective bargaining agreement," Robert said gently, though his tone offered no false hope. "Your pension and your retirement benefits are fully protected in the event of corporate layoffs, restructuring, or standard behavioral terminations. But you were not standardly terminated. You were terminated for cause, specifically involving the commission of a federal crime on company property." Brenda's breath hitched. The color drained from her face. "A crime? I just downgraded some passengers to economy. Gate agents do it all the time." "You accessed the Sabre reservation system," Robert read directly from the official legal notice drafted by Sterling Global's corporate counsel, and knowingly inputted false security threat codes designated specifically by the Transportation Security Administration to manipulate a federal flight manifest. "You did this to circumvent company policy, strip paying customers of their property, and enrich your friends with fraudulent first-class upgrades. That is a direct violation of federal aviation law. Crown Atlantic has handed your unredacted terminal logs over to the FAA and the Department of Transportation. Brenda felt the walls of the small office closing in on her. The air suddenly felt too thin to breathe. They turned me into the federal government? Yes, Robert said bluntly. And because you were fired for committing federal fraud on company time, your pension is legally forfeit. The company is clawing back every single cent of their matching contributions. Furthermore, the Department of Transportation has announced they are opening a formal civil rights investigation into your actions under Title 49. Frankly, Brenda, you shouldn't be worrying about your daughter's college tuition right now. You need to be worrying about liquidating your assets to pay for a federal criminal defense attorney. The hard, unforgiving reality of her actions finally crashed down upon her shoulders. She had built her entire identity around the meager, artificial power she wielded behind a plastic podium at Gate B22. She had genuinely thought she was untouchable, the unquestioned queen of her little airport fiefdom, deciding who was worthy of respect and who was not based purely on her own toxic prejudices. Now, she was utterly ruined. She was unemployable in the aviation sector, facing massive federal fines, her life savings obliterated, and her name a permanent synonym for bigotry. Meanwhile, the complicit network that had allowed her to thrive was systematically dismantled. Gregory Aris, the complacent station manager who had blindly signed off on her fraudulent security overrides for years, faced a similarly brutal fate. He was stripped of his lucrative severance package, escorted off the airport premises by armed Port Authority police, and permanently blacklisted from ever working in the commercial aviation industry again. Over the next 6 months, Crown Atlantic Airlines underwent a radical, top-to-bottom transformation under Richard Sterling's aggressive leadership. Sterling instituted what the corporate financial press quickly dubbed the Hayes Protocol. The vulnerable, legacy Sabre system was completely overhauled, replaced by a secure, zero-trust cybersecurity architecture designed specifically by Ciara Hayes' technology firm. The new software completely removed a frontline gate agent's ability to manually initiate a security override without strict, dual-factor authentication from a centralized corporate oversight desk in Chicago. If a passenger was involuntarily downgraded, the system automatically audited the racial and demographic data of the transaction, instantly flagging any statistical anomalies for immediate human resources review. 1 year later, the Hayes family found themselves back at John F. Kennedy International Airport's Terminal 4, preparing for a summer vacation to Paris. Ciara, wearing a comfortable black crewneck sweater and dark jeans, held Sarah's hand as they approached Gate B22. Chloe, now 9, bounced excitedly beside them, holding her stuffed golden retriever. The priority boarding lane was clearly marked with the same royal blue carpet, but the atmosphere was entirely different. The podium was staffed by a young, professional agent named Oliver. As Ciara handed over their digital boarding passes, Oliver scanned them efficiently. The monitor flashed a bright, welcoming green. "Welcome back, Mr. Hayes, Mrs. Hayes," Oliver beamed, handing the boarding passes back with genuine warmth and respect. "We are thrilled to have you flying Crown First Class with us today. Chloe, I love your golden retriever. You guys can head right down the jet bridge. Have a beautiful flight." Ciara smiled, a genuine, relaxed expression settling over his features. He looked down the long jet bridge, then glanced briefly at the exact spot where Brenda's podium used to be. The ghosts of the past had been thoroughly exorcised. True wealth wasn't about the expensive clothes you wore or the heavy metal of your credit card. It was about having the unyielding power to demand basic human dignity for your family and ensuring that a broken, prejudiced system was finally forced to change for the better. Sometimes, it takes a quiet man in a hoodie to tear down the walls of bigotry and rebuild the foundation the right way. The spectacular downfall of Brenda Carmichael serves as a chilling reminder that bigotry, when shielded by a uniform, is merely borrowed power waiting to collapse. She allowed her unconscious bias and petty arrogance to blind her, weaponizing airline security to humiliate a family she deemed unworthy. Her fatal mistake was assuming that the casually dressed Ciara Hayes lacked the power to fight back, never realizing she was insulting the architect of her company's survival in front of the man who owned it. The ensuing corporate purge and federal fallout delivered swift, unforgiving karma, stripping her of her career, pension, and reputation. Ultimately, the Hayes family's quiet dignity triumphed over public humiliation. It stands as a profound testament that true authority doesn't need to shout from behind a podium, and that the most effective way to dismantle systemic prejudice is to drag it mercilessly into the light.